You set a, which one is the right one? Okay, Andrew, you set a fairly high bar. But I will tell you, this is a little bit, and I took, even though I'm a foundation guy, I took off my coat to show that I'm sort of a normal guy here. This is going to be less about teams. It's going to be more about the environment of teams. And I could draw a connection to sort of how, why I'm going to talk about environment and not about teams. But the answer is really, I couldn't come yesterday when you're talking about money because I was in Madrid. And so what you learn when you're in Madrid is that if you want to capture people's attention, you don't talk about Van Halen, you do a tribute to Prince. So Bruce Springsteen did it this weekend, Adam Levine did it this weekend. I'm not going to do a tribute to Prince. But in the midst of all your coding, maybe when you take your specialist out to lunch, you can look at the 2007 Super Bowl halftime show. And if you want to learn what art is about, that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's about as far from building primary care capacity as I can get, but it was a good story. So I'm going to talk about money and how you build the context for the environments that you're trying to create inside your practices that we were just, Nwando and particularly, Andrew and Nwando in particular were talking about. And I think actually the lessons that Andrew was saying about community organizing inside practices apply completely to the policy environment. And I would throw out for you guys that if you don't get the policy right, all your work in the team stuff is doomed. You didn't get to Andrew's band until you did the organizing around the policy. And so I would submit that that's really important work that you have to attend to if you want to get Nwando's ice cream sundaes. So we got the evidence. It's Barbara Starfield, a lot of it published in the Milbank Quarterly, by the way, which we're proud of. How do we act on that evidence to actually change things? I want to identify two barriers, and then don't worry, we'll tell stories about the positive stuff. The first barrier is our policy choice around fragmented financing. Jonathan said it right, I agree with him. We're not going to change that in the immediate future. So if we want to make a better environment for primary care, we got to work in the context that we have, which is a lot of money coming from a lot of different places. And I'm doing it an injustice to think that all that blue is one payer. You all know it's self-insured, it's multiple payers, it's multiple states. And you know this because this is what, if you work in practice, this is what your revenue looks like. You've got revenue coming in from all these payers or more. How do you get it aligned in a particular direction? The second barrier to creating a more primary care-centric environment, I think, is the way it's not just, I'll say it, it's not just how you get paid, it's how much you get paid. And on the private side, it's a race. We've got rate setting in Medicaid and Medicare, but we've got private negotiations. And this is about money. You need money to create the kind of environment that you want to do. And you're not going to win this race. You're starting from further behind. Sorry, Scott, I'm doing tribalism here. You're starting from further behind because of Medicare RVUs, and you got a smaller engine because you don't have negotiating power. So the outcome of this race is pretty foreordained, and it's self-perpetuating because all of you who work in academic practices know that in a setting like this, primary care becomes mission work. We all feel really good about it, but we lose out. We lose out for numbers, we lose out for quality because the status, the prestige, and the money is going into specialty because of the rules that we set up around how much people get paid. So that is the doomsday scenario. What I want to do is tell a story about attempts to change some of this stuff. The first lesson, and I'm only going to talk about the right-hand side of my pie chart, the blues, is changing the accountability for health insurance. This is a picture from 2003 of a protest in front of the Rhode Island State House. Michael Fine and I can tell you the number of times we trudged up those steps. The guy at the podium is a family physician and head of the Rhode Island Medical Society. They were protesting the way they were getting paid. They were protesting the way Blue Cross was treating them. They were protesting an inability to organize around for private negotiations. They wanted to do some collective bargaining. They were doing malpractice reforms. They were just ticked. and they put on their white coats, and they got the stethoscopes around them, and they came up. If you look in the back, you see buses. The Medical Society even went so far as to bus the docs up there to speak about this. This is 2003, 2004. It took a year. The legislature passed a law, the Rhode Island Healthcare Reform Act, that, among other things, changed the accountability for commercial health insurance. Said that health insurers in Rhode Island, and I want to make this about insurance, not about insurers. No use in demonizing folks. Insurance was not only about solvency. We don't want insurers to go bankrupt. And it wasn't just about consumer protection. It was about fair treatment of providers and efforts to improve the system. Meaning that we look at health insurance differently from the way that we look at property and casualty. We don't hold Allstate accountable for making housing better. We hold Blue Cross or United accountable for making healthcare better. That's a fundamentally different way of looking at healthcare financing than we look at other kinds of insurance. And it was brought out in large part because a bunch of physicians got ticked off, took time off from their practice, and went up and started rattling at the legislators. Second step was that once we created the Office of the Health Insurance Commissioner, what does it mean to improve the system? Well, we went where the evidence was, and the evidence was that primary care is drastically underpaid. Percentage of healthcare expenses that go to primary care in Rhode Island was no different from any place else. In commercial health insurance, it's about 5 to 7%, very significantly, depending on Medicaid or Medicare, but we're talking about commercial health insurance. What we said was that as a condition of getting your rates, you actually have to increase that by a point a year. So in 5 years, you have to go from 5.5% to 10.5%. Can you do that? Yeah. You don't get your rates if you don't. Well, that means we can't pay someone else as much. Oh, and by the way, you couldn't contribute to overall health insurance increases. So they said, but that means we have to pay somebody else less. We said, yeah, that's right. We're equalizing the engines in that race around there. And they said, what are we supposed to do if someone says they won't, that's not fair? And I said, well, tell them the health insurance commissioner made you do it. 5 years later, what do we got? Yeah. An extra $34 million a year going in the system to primary care just for commercial health insurance. Turns out that health insurers will follow the rules as long as you're clear about what the rules are and you're consistent in enforcing them. They just want to know what the rules are and that everyone's following them, and they'll play by those rules because every one of them had seen the same evidence. They were trapped the same way. They wanted to give more money to primary care. They couldn't. And once they knew it was going to be safe, they could go ahead and do it. What'd they spend it on? Our advisory council, community organizing Andrew, said, we don't want to see it going to fee-for-service. You can spend on anything you want within primary care. Just don't spend it on increased fees, okay? So the percentage of revenue, primary care spend, that went to non-fee-for-service went from, what's at the bottom, about 10% up to 50%. The interesting thing was that we put some pretty wide guardrails around that. So some insurers, and it's a small market, that's how we could get away with this, because we didn't have to have too many complex negotiations. Some insurers spend it on pay for performance. Other insurers spend it on upfront patient-centered medical home. We didn't really care. We didn't want to get too prescriptive on this. We just knew that you couldn't keep spending on fee-for-service stuff. We didn't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We didn't want to overprescribe it. So this was over 5 years. It continues to go on in Rhode Island. What were some of the results? During this time, health spending grew slower in Rhode Island than any other New England state. Now, as I tell my students in the public health class, correlation is not causality, especially in 5 years, but the point is that the wheels did not fall off. So during this time, things did not explode because we put a thumb on the scale for primary care. Other things that happened. One of the 10 most successful primary care-based ACOs was born during that period. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island established a patient-centered medical home project that they continue to fund, I wouldn't say made possible, but certainly enabled by the fact that they had to spend the money on primary care. We funded a health information exchange, one of the few public utility health information exchanges that actually exists. And we established grew a multi-payer primary care transformation that participates in the MAPCP program. What we're trying to do is to create an environment for primary care to do the kind of work that's being described here by making it clear that this has got to be financed. What didn't happen? We didn't have world peace. All the things that you guys aspire to say that will happen if we have a primary care center, it's not going to happen in 5 years. Don't overpromise. We didn't have longer lifespans. We didn't have costs going down through the basement. But we also didn't have specialists fleeing to Massachusetts, which we were concerned that we were going to have. We didn't have primary care docs driving around in fancy cars, which some people were concerned about. We just created an environment that was a little bit better to do the kind of work that you were trying to do. So the moral of the story is that you got to act on it. We have the evidence. You have to learn how to act on the evidence. What's really important is to do exactly the same kind of organizing that Andrew's talking about. I think we're a long way from putting a ring on the finger, as Beyonce would say, around primary care. But you guys have a role in that. You have invested, you've invested your time, you have moral authority. I tell you, as a public official, it made all the difference when primary care docs would actually get out there and speak for this stuff. We did a lot of it without, we would pick primary care docs and ask them to come to meetings and speak up just to sort of stage it. So make the time to get involved to create the policy environment that's necessary for the changes that you want. And then once you create that environment, which means holding health insurers accountable for improving the system, pay attention to the primary care spend number. They're doing this in Rhode Island. They're doing this in New York. They've got a report on it in Oregon. Stir this up a little bit. This is where the money makes a difference. And you've got to pay it. This is a single measure, an indicator that people can focus on that makes a difference. It creates, again, the kind of environment that you need to do the work that is so important. The evidence says is what's necessary for improving population health. Thanks.